Ah, that's what I was looking for. The angle of the camera. Okay, I didn't quite get the camera angle right. Having a little bit of a trouble. We're about to get a storm, so having a little bit of trouble with light issues, and apparently the camera angle. Now, maybe we'll play with it for a sec. But you know what? Okay, before I get into moving the camera around and being annoying, more annoying than usual, I'm going to turn on my air conditioner because it's 900 degrees in here because it is summer in Florida, in southern Florida. And then I'm also going to put on The Judgment of Paris. And I've talked about this in other videos, and I've given out all the wrong names because this is how I operate. I get it all wrong until I get it right. But The Judgment of Paris is about the Paris in the 1860s. In the art world in Paris in the 1860s, excuse me, when the Great Salon was going on, there was a jury that every year would invite artists to submit work, and thousands of artists would send in thousands of people's pieces of work to the Salon Jury Committee to be accepted or rejected in the Salon of the Louvre. Excuse me, it is 90, let's keep that in mind, and I'm me, so it's not going to come out right. But anyway, in the end, 2,000 to 3,000 pieces of work might be rejected. They would be rejected with a red stamp on the back of the painting, which would then make it completely unsellable. But it's that period in the 1860s when we're going from classical artwork and more realist and representational something or other art to Impressionism. And the Impressionism was just this movement that seemed to come out of nowhere because of great artists like Manet, Monet, Cezanne, and all these other really wonderful, lovely artists in Paris at the time. Oh, and Whistler was there. I don't think of Whistler as an Impressionist painter on any level, but he was there too, and they didn't like him either. But I'm at a point in the book where Cezanne just keeps getting rejected over and over and over again, and he goes in there with this bold determination. I have been painting regardless. I am producing work regardless of these people. And he's pronounced it to the newspaper, and I'm going to keep trying. And of course, you know, they reject his work and he goes into this deep depression pit and ugh. So, but guess who wins out in the end? It isn't the men who stood in the Louvre saying, we are important, we know what taste is, we know what art is, and that ain't it, Cezanne, or Monet, or Manet, or, you know, the million other guys that are producing this whole wave of a new movement in art. We know what art is. We don't know their names. We don't know the judges, the jurymen's names. Well, we kind of do, but we don't. But we know Cezanne, and we know that he was brilliant, as the Van Goghs, as the Monets, as the Monets of all, you know, all these people that completely changed art in the art world. Geniuses. Whereas Fred, the guy who went, we don't know who he is. So that's where I am in the book. I'm going to turn this on, I'm going to turn the AC on, and I'm going to get to work on Lauren Mitchell. Painting a portrait I started about a month ago, and I put to the side while I got through work that had been driving me crazy, got it finished up, put it against the wall to dry. It's looking at the wall, so I don't have to look at it anymore. But also, while I've been working on Alopecia, and pronouncing every weekend. This weekend I will have her done, and she's still not done. While I've been working on Mehitable, the Tattooed Lady, and Wadez, or Maggie. But this week I'm pulling out Lauren, and we're going to see how far I get. I really don't have the colors I need. I don't have the paints that I need, so I'm pretty upset over that. But I'm also looking at it as a challenge, because I usually have to work on a shoestring. So here we are on a shoestring. I don't have transparent or thread, which I mix in with all my colors and use, which I planned on using in the background here, but it's not possible today. So I have to find another route, and that's what I will do, is let the paint tell me what I should be doing, what colors I should be using. to continue working on Lauren, since I don't have everything I want. But I do have Neoma Gilp. That I really can't paint without, but I do have a ton of Neoma Gilp. My favorite painting, my only painting medium really. Where is it? Where's the camera? There it is. So I can work. Anyway, I'm going to turn on the AC because now I'm sweaty and confused. And turn on my book, Judgment of Paris by Ross King. Alright? Ciao. I hope you've got your project out or something.
Meissonier returned to Italy before the end of March, in time to participate in the Jewish... Meissonier returned from Italy before the end of March, in time to participate in the jury sessions for the 1870 Salon. Despite the presence of Chenevier and other conservatives, the jury actually proved rather lenient, admitting almost 3,000 canvases. Manet's portrait of Eva Gonzalez was accepted along with his second submission, The Music Lesson, in which he had posed Zachary Strub with a guitar in a kind of rehash of the Spanish singer. Other Batignolles painters fared equally well. Renoir's 2 canvases passed muster with the jury, as did paintings by Pizarro and Sisley. Berthe Morisot's The Harbour of Lorient and a portrait of her sister Edma were likewise accepted. As for Cézanne, he had been in a bombastic mood when a journalist encountered him carrying his canvases to the Palais des Champs-Élysées in the week before judging started. "Yes, my dear sir," Cézanne airily informed him, "I painted as I see, as I feel, and I have very strong sensations. I dare, sir, I dare. I have the courage of my opinions, and he who laughs last, laughs best."
So there.
The jurors responded in their usual fashion. "I have been rejected, as in the past," Cézanne, in a less buoyant frame of mind, wrote a few weeks later to a friend in Aix. Also rejected, more controversially, was Claude Monet, marking the second year in a row which he had been excluded from the Salon. "The worst thing is that I can no longer even work," the furious Monet had written a year earlier, following the jury's wholesale rejection of his work. But he had in fact managed to work in the summer of 1869, and he had produced, at this low point in his life, his most dazzling canvases. Before the 1869 Salon closed, Monet had taken Camille Dancieux and their son Jean to the hamlet of Saint-Michel, on the Seine 8 miles west of Paris. There the family lived with, so Monet claimed, no bread, no kitchen, fire, no light. It's horrible. He was soon joined on his plein-air painting excursions by Renoir, who was staying nearby with his parents at Louveciennes. Together, the pair of them would visit an island in the Seine at Bougival, the Ile de Poissy, where a fashionable entertainment complex known as La Grenouillère, the Frog Pond, had operated for the previous 2 decades. Situated on the south side of the island, La Grenouillère consisted of a bathing pond and, floating on pontoons, a restaurant fashioned from an old barge. As early as 1854, a book called Le Sport à Paris related that La Grenouillère had become popular with men and women belonging to the artistic life of Paris, including, the author reported, Ernest Meissonier, who helped popularize swimming, fishing, and rowing in the area. The restaurant was even frequented by the Emperor and Empress, who stopped for a visit during a steamboat ride along the Seine in the summer of 1869. Monet and Renoir had positioned themselves side by side on the riverbank at this fashionable pleasure spot. They assembled their easels a few yards away from a small artificial island, some 15 feet in diameter, that was joined by footbridges to the restaurant and shore, and that was known, after wheels of the famous Normandy cheese, as Le Camembert. Painting sketches of the scene before them, the figures grouped on the miniature island, the corner of the restaurant, the trees on the opposite bank at Bougival, they concentrated most of all on the waters of the Seine, sparkling in the foreground, conjuring vibrant optical effects by dissolving solid forms into dazzling patches of colour. Monet in particular excelled at the task of capturing the light shimmering on the waves. He worked on the same pale ground favoured by Manet, but further heightened his luminous tones by painting with vibrant pigments, some of them newly invented, which he added to his canvas in small commas and dashes. Advances in chemistry during the Industrial Revolution meant 19th century painters possessed a much wider range of pigments than artists of earlier centuries. Oddly, however, many painters were reluctant to expand their chromatic horizons, largely due to the prejudice against colour and force, for example, at the École des Beaux-Arts. Rather than exploiting the properties of these radiant new pigments, artists learned to tone down their works by coating them with transparent brownish glazes made from ingredients such as bitumen. As a collector had once informed John Constable, a good picture, like a good fiddle, should be brown. Painters who challenged this prejudice against colour, most notably Delacroix, who used as many as 23 pigments on a single canvas, found themselves reviled by conservative critics. Monet was happy to avail himself of advances in paint technology. The coruscating reflections in his Lagouanère canvases owed much to his use of pigments such as chromium oxide green and cobalt violet. The former, a yellowish green resulting from a chemical reaction involving chromium salts and boric acid, was produced as a pigment by a Parisian colour merchant only in 1862. Cobalt violet, invented in 1859 by a French chemist named Jean Salvatat, was almost as new. Monet blended it with Prussian blue to create the shimmering water in the foreground. He would eventually come to regard this particular pigment as essential for capturing the effects of light and shade. "I have finally discovered the colour of the atmosphere," he later declared. "It is violet." Though he possessed as profound and instinctual a grasp of colour as anyone who ever held a brush, Monet might never have discovered the true nature of the atmosphere without the help of chemists like Salvatat. Both Monet and Renoir began hatching plans to turn their sketches into studio paintings. "I really have a daydream," Monet had written to Basile at the end of September, "a painting of bathing at La Grande-Myre, for which I've done a few bad sketches, but it's a daydream." Renoir, who just spent 2 months here, also wants to do this picture. Monet accordingly began turning his hasty paint-dappled sketches of Le Camembert into a larger canvas intended for the 1870 salon. He encountered problems only when he and Renoir were short of money for pigment, food and wine. "We don't eat every day," Renoir wrote to Basile, adding pluckily, "yet I am happy in spite of it, because as far as painting is concerned, Monet is good company." The only other problem, he claimed, was the dead donkeys that came floating down the river. Despite his various privations, Monet managed to complete a studio version of his La Grande-Myre scene, which the following March he submitted to the Palais des Champs-Élysées, along with The Luncheon, an interior scene, reminiscent of Manet's interior of the same name, painted a year earlier at Étretat. Monet undoubtedly expected a better result than in 1869, since the new jury included Daubigny and Corot, but the votes, when they tallied, went against both paintings. This rejection led to the immediate resignation of Daubigny, who, as in 1868, pleaded with his colleagues to take a more tolerant view of Monet's canvases. "I wouldn't allow my opinion to be contradicted," Daubigny later claimed. "You might as well say that I don't know my trade." In the minds of most jurors, however, Monet had simply gone too far in his abominable direction, as one juror, Jules Breton, had phrased it. With their seemingly slipshod facture, his paintings looked like mere preparatory sketches, not works of art finished to the standard of salon paintings. Monet, in their opinion, required chastisement, and with 5 of his last 6 paintings rejected from the salon, he had become the newest grand refusé. The 1870 salon opened, like its predecessor a year earlier, against the background of a fierce political campaign. In the 3rd week of April, the Emperor had called for a plebiscite on the following point. The people approved the liberal reforms carried out in the Constitution by the Emperor with the assistance of senior institutions of the state. Louis Napoleon was hoping to strengthen his hand against the political opposition by seeking ratification from the French people for the transformation of his regime into a liberal empire. In the months before the plebiscite, due to be held on the 8th of May, several events indicated that Louis Napoleon could expect a rough political ride. At the end of March, Prince Pierre Bonaparte had been acquitted of Victor Noir's murder, leading to outrage in many newspapers and riots in the streets of the working-class districts of Paris. A month later, an assassination plot against the emperor was uncovered as a 23-year-old army deserter named Camille Burly was arrested in the Rue des Moulins, carrying a loaded pistol with which he claimed he was intending to shoot Louis Napoleon. The plot was supposedly the work of the AIT, the French section of the International Association of Working Men, founded in London in 1864 by Karl Marx. Olivier immediately took the convenient precaution of arresting hundreds of socialists and closing down left-wing newspapers. The Palais des Champs-Élysées must almost have seemed like an oasis of calm in the midst of this turbulence. For Manet, however, the experience was as unpleasant as ever, with his paintings attracting the usual enmity and ridicule. If he expected his portrait of Eva Gonzalez to be spared derision because of the sitter's father, he was disabused of the notion as soon as he opened the pages of Le Figaro. Its chief reviewer, Albert Wolff, the man who predicted...
Okay. Oop. Okay. I have very little battery power, so this apparently isn't going to last long. But I'd really like to point out that I thought the salon was held in the Louvre, and that's what I mentioned. It was held in the Champs-Élysées, something or other. Like I said, I get it all wrong before I get it right.
that Manet would never accomplish anything, scorned the portrait as a flat and abominable caricature in oils, and claimed Manet was producing coarse images for the sole purpose of attracting attention. Coverage in La Presse was no better, with an article entitled Manet's Horrors, describing the two canvases as exceeding the most ridiculous things you could imagine, while Illustration asserted that Manet's work provokes only laughter or pity. If Manet was hoping to please Théophile Gautier with the music lesson, a work that we call The Spanish Singer, which Gautier had praised in 1861, he was sorely disappointed. Gautier wrote in Le Journal Officiel that Manet was painting in defiance of art, the public and the critics, adding, none of the early promises has been fulfilled. Once again, even Cassinari, a progressive critic, could find nothing good to say. Believing the sole aim of art to be the reproduction of nature in all its maximum power and intensity, for the past decade, Cassinari, like Baudelaire, had been urging artists to offer dynamic images of modern life, both the uncouth force of the countryside and the beautiful triumphs of city life. He believed that Manet's two canvases, what he saw as a pair of sterile and undistinguished portraits, revealed nothing of this energy. Cassinari could appreciate neither Manet's elusive subjects that owed as much to the galleries of the Louvre as the boulevards outside, nor the novel style that led him to experiment with, for instance, plainer compositions and impasted shadows. Blind to the painter's unique vision of modern life, he simply charged Manet with failing in his mission to reflect the society in which we live. In this particularly wounding review in Le Siècle, he argued that the two canvases gave proof neither of extensive intellectual preoccupations nor of powerful faculties of observation. The only flattering words in the end came from Manet's antagonist on the field of honour, Edmond Duranty, who made up for his harsh words in February by heralding Manet in the same journal as one of the first painters of the age. A full 7 years after Le Déjeuner sur l'Heure made its appearance, most critics had not budged an inch in their appraisals. They still faulted Manet for inelegant brushwork, flawed perspective, undignified subjects, and a supposed insincerity of purpose, suspicious of an elaborate jape. Over the past few years, he even failed in Cassinari's view to produce forceful and convincing visions of modern life. As a frustrated Gautier complained, Manet seemed to be perpetrating the same outrages in salon after salon. A number of critics who had encouraged his efforts earlier in his career, like Cassinari and to a lesser extent Gautier, had by 1870 thrown their hands in the air. Each new salon, Gautier despaired, seems to prove that Monsieur Manet has resolved to die, impenitent. The gulf between Manet's canvases and the desires and expectations of many critics and jurors could clearly be seen in the choice of the Grand Medal of Honor for 1870. Robert Fleuret, the 33-year-old son of the director of the École des Beaux-Arts, was given the highest award for The Last Day of Corinth, a sprawling scene from the pages of Greek historian Polybius. A painter of historical episodes, often massacres, Robert Fleury impressed the jurors with his depiction of what Polybius called the consummation of the misfortunes of Greece, the sack of Corinth by the Romans in 146 BC. The incidents of the capture of Corinth were melancholy. Polybius, an eyewitness to these events, had reported. The men were murdered, the women sold into slavery, the city walls turned to rubble, the buildings torched, and, most disconcerting to Polybius, the works of art looted or destroyed. Robert Fleury showed this tragedy unfolding amid weeping women sprawled before their mounted conquerors as a pall of black smoke rose over the devastated city. Though he was anything but a painter of modern life, his magnificent but terrifying canvas, with its depiction of a refined and resplendent civilization put to the sword, would bear a horrible relevance in 1870. The admiring visitors who clustered before the last day of Corinth could not have known that in this image of the past lay an appalling vision of their future. Chapter 30. The Prussian Terror. To be sure, Paris in the early summer of 1870 did not look like a city on the brink of disaster. In May, a new ballet, Coppelia, featuring music by Léo Delibes, was staged at the Théâtre Impérial de l'Opéra. In June, the Grand Prix de Paris was run for the 8th time. The winner by a length was Sornette, a mare whose name translates as nonsense or idle chit-chat. The women attending the races in Chantilly and Longchamp had paraded the latest fashions, including the chapeau pomponnette, a bonnet adorned with roses and secured beneath the chin with a large bow. Pale turquoise soon became popular in homage to the livery of Sornette's owner, Charles Lafitte. Horse racing was not the only sport causing excitement. An 83-mile road race from Paris to Rouen was inaugurated, with competitors riding rubber-wheeled, pedal-powered contraptions known as velocipede, for which a Frenchman named Pierre Lelmont had received a patent in 1866. Victory went to an Englishman, James Moore, who completed the course in under 11 hours. However, a few dark clouds appeared on the horizon in the summer of 1870. There was an outbreak of smallpox in Paris, and a drought that led to a fire in the forest of Fontainebleau, a rise in the price of bread, and the sight of congregations of the faithful carrying holy relics around the churches and praying for rain. Strikes afflicted an iron foundry in Le Creusot, north of Lyon, while riots in Paris resulted in overturned omnibuses, mass arrests, and several deaths. Nonetheless, despite the unrest, the Emperor and Émile Olivier had reason to feel encouraged, since the plebiscite on his reforms had been won on the 8th of May by an overwhelming 7.5 million to 1.5 million. "I am back to my old score," gloated Louis Napoleon. When the results were formally proclaimed in the Salle des États in the Louvre, the Emperor, dressed in his general's uniform, delivered a speech declaring that the plebiscite revealed a striking token of confidence in his leadership. Many of the newspapers concurred, and across the Channel, the editors of the Times praised him as a wise, firm, and provident leader. Huge crowds turned out in the Rue de Rivoli and the Champs-Élysées to cheer "Vive l'Empereur" as his carriage passed. The Emperor's poor health, however, was still a cause for concern. In May, he had been visited by his old friend, Lord Malmesbury, who was shocked to find him prematurely old and broken. In the first week of June, the papers were reporting that he was slightly indisposed, with a touch of rheumatism, and a few days later, gout was disclosed. A specialist in bladder diseases confirmed the secret diagnosis of a bladder stone. Then, on the 1st of July, a team of 5 doctors, including an eminent surgeon who had once operated on Garibaldi's foot, examined the patient to decide if he was fit enough to risk a lithotripsy. Chastened by the recent death of Adolphe Neil, they quickly decided against it. With the Emperor ill and infirm, the events of the next fortnight unfolded with astonishing speed and a dreadful implacability. On the 2nd of July, the day following the examination, the Spanish Prime Minister, Juan Prim, announced that he had found a replacement for the unpopular Queen Isabella II, deposed in the September Revolution of 1868. After scouring the royal houses of Europe, Prim had decided to offer the Spanish crown to a Hohenzollern prince named Leopold von Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, brother of the King of Romania and a distant relative of King Wilhelm of Prussia. The choice did not sit well with Louis Napoleon. Though he too was distantly related to Prince Leopold, who was the grandson of Napoleon Bonaparte's niece, Stephanie de Beauharnais, he was worried that the Prussians, with the Hohenzollern ensconced on the Spanish throne, together with their recent territorial advances in Central Europe, would in effect have France surrounded. As the French Foreign Minister, the Duc de Gramont, phrased it, the coronation would disturb the European equilibrium to our disadvantage. On the 9th of July, therefore, the French ambassador to Prussia, Comte Vincent Benedetti, met 4 times with King Wilhelm, who was staying in the waters of the resort town of Ems, near Koblenz. Prince Leopold could not accept the throne without first asking permission from the head of the Hohenzollern family, namely King Wilhelm, and Louis Napoleon made it clear through Benedetti that he wished the king to withhold his consent. When Wilhelm politely acceded to his wishes, Prince Leopold withdrew his candidature on the 12th, a move hailed by Olivier as a triumph for France and a humiliation for Prussia. Yet not everyone in France was delighted with this peaceful outcome, in large because of the way Otto von Bismarck had affronted the French by refusing to hand over territories along the Rhine as payment for French neutrality in the war that Prussia fought against Austria in 1866. "The country will be disappointed," Louis Napoleon cabled Olivier, "but what can we do?" The Emperor was correct. The press, the public, the politicians, even the Empress Eugénie, who had supposedly exclaimed, "This is my war," all were not a little disgruntled that there would be no war to check the territorial advance of what Alexandre Dumas Père had called the Prussian Terror. Almost the only person in France who did not desire a war with Prussia was, it seems, the Emperor himself. Louis Napoleon nevertheless agreed with the decision taken by Olivier and his cabinet to have Benedetti, in a deliberately provocative move, press the King of Prussia for a further guarantee. On the 13th of July, accordingly, Benedetti approached the 73-year-old Wilhelm on the promenade at Enns, asking him to repudiate forever the possibility of a Hohenzollern accepting the Spanish crown. Wilhelm sternly refused, then gave instructions for a telegram recounting this latest twist, the famous Enns telegram, to be sent to Bismarck, his Minister President. Bismarck was as eager for a war with France as the French were for a war with Prussia. Having over the past 4 years given a burly embrace to most of Germany's 38 disparate duchies, princedoms and city-states, he believed a crisis such as a Franco-Prussian conflict would unite the remaining states, including Bavaria and Württemberg, into a single power under the leadership of Prussia. He therefore seized on the strategy of editing the telegram to make the king's words seem more defiant and insulting than in the original, then publishing the doctored text in the newspapers. Wilhelm's original telegram had stated that he had nothing further to say to Benedetti, because word had arrived in Enns that Prince Leopold was withdrawing his candidature. Bismarck cunningly omitted this reference to news of Leopold's withdrawal, thus making the king's refusal to grant a further audience to Benedetti look like a direct result of Benedetti's request, and an insult to France. Bismarck predicted that the amended telegram would serve as a red rag to the Gallic bull. He could not have judged his prospective enemy more astutely. "Everyone wants to eat Prussians," Théophile Gautier observed of the jingoistic crowds in Paris following the telegram's publication. If anyone spoke in favour of peace, he would be killed on the spot. Within days, the Duc de Gramont was announcing that a state of war existed between France and Prussia. In 1806, the French under Napoleon had defeated the Prussians in a 6-week campaign, trouncing them with such a plum at the Battle of Jena that the philosopher Hegel had been moved to celebrate Napoleon as the world's soul. In 1870, all signs indicated that the outcome would be otherwise. The French military attaché in Berlin had recently made a chilling observation. Prussia is not a country which has an army. Prussia is an army which has a country. King Wilhelm, a professional soldier who spent his adolescence fighting the Grande Armée, was able to field an army of 500,000 men, with 160,000 reserves, numbers that could virtually be doubled when he called on the other German states in the Confederation. Louis Napoleon, on the other hand, had at his disposal only 350,000 men, 60,000 of whom were occupied in Algeria, with 6,000 more protecting the Pope in Rome. Yet despite the size and strength of the Prussian war machine, the French were strangely confident of victory. Their soldiers were equipped with the Chassepot, the most advanced rifle of the day, a weapon unveiled at the Universal Exposition in 1867. They also had a more secret and deadly invention called the mitrailleuse, a machine gun with 25 rotating barrels that could fire 150 rounds a minute. Olivier had announced in the Legislative Assembly that he was declaring war with a light heart. The Minister of War, Marshal Edmond Leboeuf, assured his countrymen that the war against the Prussians would be a mere stroll, walking stick in hand. In the days following the announcement, Parisians marched along the boulevards chanting "Vive la guerre!" A soprano named Madame Sasse sang the Marseillaise in the streets dressed in the costume of the Goddess of France, while another singer, Mademoiselle Thérèse, belted it out at the Théâtre Gaieté in the costume of a waitress. Crowds besieged the enlisting officers, and a troop of soldiers paraded with a parrot trained to squawk, "To Berlin!" It is in this frivolous spirit, an English newspaper reported, that the nation which pretends to consider itself the most civilized in the world enters upon a war, the terrible consequences of which few dare trust themselves to contemplate. One of the few who dared was Gautier. Who knows, he asked nervously, what measureless conflagration will devour Europe? The French headquarters for the war against the Prussians became Metz, a city on the river Moselle that lay within striking distance of the Rhineland. Its attractions included a Roman aqueduct and a Gothic cathedral. More to the point, it had thick defensive walls and a powerful fortress known, because it had never been captured, as La Pucelle, the Virgin. Metz had not been taken by the enemy, in fact, since it was plundered in the middle of the 5th century by the forces of Attila the Hun. In the summer of 1870, its residents prepared themselves for battle with the modern-day Huns led by Otto von Bismarck. Ernest Meissonier arrived in Metz at the end of July, within a fortnight of the declaration of war. He had abandoned both Friedland, which he believed himself close to finishing at last, as well as his studio in Poissy, and, in repeat of his expedition to the Italian front in 1859, set off on Lady Conyngham, his beloved mare, for the 175-mile journey. In his luggage was a supply of sketching materials, as well as official papers impressively announcing him as Monsieur Meissonier on special service. He was hoping to record a French victory such as Solferino, or better yet, Jena or Friedland. Emma had been very much against the enterprise, attempting to dissuade her husband, by then the 55-year-old grandfather, from risking his neck for the sake of a painting. But Meissonier was adamant. "Don't worry that I will let myself get intoxicated by the smell of powder," he wrote home to her. "It isn't the horrible things of war that I want to paint. It's the life of the soldier, the strange and picturesque behaviour of which one cannot have any idea when one hasn't seen it." Meissonier was received by the staff of the Emperor's headquarters in Metz almost as a herald of victory. But very soon he became aware that French preparations were not everything they might have been. The 200,000 troops gathered in the region, Meissonier's students, Maurice Goron and Lucien Gros among them, were dismally provisioned. The trains carrying them to the front had been overcrowded and running late, and when they finally arrived in Metz, the men found themselves short of tents, kettles, sugar, coffee and cooking pots, as well as maps and ammunition. Even horses were in short supply because Marshal Leboeuf, in a staggering display of short-sightedness and sheer stupidity, sold many of them due to the lack of fodder caused by the summer's drought. The soldiers did manage to find alcohol, however, and many quickly became insensible and, as a natural matter of course, indisciplined and indisposed. Drunken antics that were not quite the strange and picturesque behaviour Meissonier had been hoping to capture on canvas. He also discovered, to his own inconvenience, a shortage of billets. He had been expecting to stay with a friend of friends of mine, an engineer named Prouch, but due to some oversight, Prouch had no quarters to offer him. The most eminent painter in France thereby found himself occupying a humble room in the riverside home of a family of poor but decent people. The Emperor had been accommodated in a more befitting style. His headquarters in Metz, to which he had come to assume personal command of the forces, was a private train appointed with oak panelling, Aubusson tapestries, and Louis XV furniture. But he too felt his spirit sink at the sight of his ill-provisioned and ill-disciplined troops. "Nothing is ready," he wrote to the Empress Eugénie soon after arriving. "We do not have sufficient troops. I regard us already as lost." This pessimism was born of his superstition as much as his growing awareness of the idiocy and incompetence of his various generals. Before departing from Paris, he had paid a visit to his most recent mistress, a golden-haired Belgian countess named Louis de Mercy-Argenteau, who was surprised to see him extract from his pocketbook a scrap of paper covered in mysterious hieroglyphics. It was a horoscope, he told her, that had been discovered among his mother's possessions after her death, and that predicted the entire course of his life. "So my reign is to finish," Louis Napoleon had informed the startled countess on the eve of his departure for Metz, "and the Prussians are to be victorious." The Emperor's horoscope swiftly assumed a grim air of infallibility. As battle was joined at the beginning of August, the dash of the French officers in their gorgeous uniforms, the bearskin shakos, the gold braid, the tasseled turbans, and stylish cutaway tunics proved themselves no match for ruthless Prussian steel, especially the 50-ton cannon manufactured by Alfred Krupp and menacingly displayed at the Universal Exposition 3 years earlier. The French troops were defeated on the 4th of August at Wissembourg, and then 2 days later at battles in Forbach and Worth. At the later battle in Alsace, the legendary cuirassiers showed themselves dismally ineffective against the awesome long-range Prussian firepower. "Farewell forever to military pictures," sighed a disconsolate Meissonier, packing away his paints and brushes. The Emperor too despaired at these defeats. He began making plans for a hasty return to Paris, but Eugénie, sensing the hostile mood in the capital, informed him he could not show his face without a victory. Already angry crowds were encircling the Palais Bourbon, which housed the Legislative Assembly, and noisily demanding a republic. On the 12th, the Emperor handed command of the army to François-Achille Bazin, a general who had the dubious distinction of having led the French exodus from Mexico in 1867, He then retreated in a third-class railway carriage to Chalon-sur-Marne, midway between Paris and Metz. Bazaine and his troops were promptly defeated at the Battle of Vionville, and then a few days later at Gravelotte-Saint-Privat, a few miles west of Metz. Cowardice as well as incompetence had by then infected the French ranks, since several cavalry regiments were reported to have wheeled and taken flight at the cry, "The Prussians are coming!" Clearly, French military valour had wilted since the days when Napoleon's gros frère bestrode the continent. Otto von Bismarck in the Prussian camp gleefully wrote home to his wife Joanna that the war is as good as ended, unless God should manifestly intervene for France, which I trust will not happen. Soon after the defeats of the 6th of August, Meissonier retreated from Metz, with my heart like lead. On the morning following the disaster at Worth, he had come across Marshal Leboeuf, the man who claimed the war would be a mere stroll, walking stick in hand. His obvious dejection and defeatism left Meissonier overflowing with sadness and despair, and, determined to get out of Metz while he still could, "How right you were to try to prevent my starting," he wrote despondently to Emma. He set forth at 3 o'clock in the morning, encountering only a column of defeated soldiers making for the safety of the city's fortress. "I was dressed in the queerest fashion," he later wrote. Leaving all his luggage in the care of the unreliable Pruch, he had set off from Lady Conyngham wearing a grey cloak, a straw hat, and a pair of holsters into which, for want of weapons, he had thrust several bars of soap. His cross of the Legion of Honour was around his neck. "In this strange get-up," he wrote, "I might easily, in the disturbed state of men's minds, have been taken for a spy." In fact, a day later, halting at an inn near Gravelotte, he was subjected to the distrustful eyes and suspicious murmurs of the other patrons. A sergeant of gendarmes was promptly summoned, and Meissonier escaped arrest, or worse, only when he produced his on special service papers. 30 miles from Metz, at the citadel in Verdun, he met an old friend, Colonel Dupressoir, who had since been promoted to the rank of general. Dupressoir promptly arranged for his evacuation from the theatre of war on a cattle train. Meissonier's war was thereby ended, along with any aspirations to paint an heroic French victory. On the 30th of August, the French met with yet another defeat, this time at Beaumont-sur-Meuse. The Emperor, who had returned to the front, was forced to fall back on Sedan, a small citadel town on the right bank of the River Meuse. With him was Marshal Patrice MacMahon, a hero of the Crimean War, and 100,000 troops. MacMahon was promptly wounded in the leg by Prussian gunfire. He turned over his command to General Ducreux, who, realizing that the hills surrounding Sedan would make excellent emplacements for the deadly Prussian cannons, uttered the memorable words, "We're in a chamber pot and about to be shat upon." It was a statement displaying a foresight hitherto alien to the French military command. The Battle of Sedan commenced on the 1st of September, with the Prussian artillery blasting the city as the French cavalry, heroically, but suicidally redeeming itself, charged to its inevitable destruction. "Ah, the brave fellows!" exclaimed King Wilhelm as he witnessed the carnage. Among them was the Emperor himself, who spent 5 hours in the saddle. He was suffering excruciating pain, not only from his bladder stone, but also, like his uncle at Waterloo, from hemorrhoids. Towels had to be stuffed into his breeches to sop up the blood. The agony must have been constant, one of his doctors later claimed. I cannot understand how he would have borne it. Realizing that all was lost, the Emperor repeatedly exposed himself to the fire of enemy guns, doing his best to die in the battle. When even that tactic failed, he lamented bitterly that he was not even able to get himself killed. He ordered the white flag of surrender to be raised above the citadel at 3:15 in the afternoon. The Second Empire of Napoleon III had reached its inglorious end. A day later, Louis Napoleon turned over his sword to King Wilhelm at the Château de Bellevue, and then, escorted by a troop of black-caped Death's Head hussars, went as a prisoner to Wilhelmshöhe, a chateau near Cassel that was once owned, in an ironic twist of fate, by one of his uncles, King Jerome of Westphalia. "Poor Emperor," wrote Théophile Gautier, "what a lamentable end to a dazzling dream." Chapter 31. The Last Days of Paris. 3 days after the defeat at Sedan, Ernest Meissonier visited a friend who lived in the Rue de Rome, Louis-Joseph Ernest Cézanne, an engineer who until recently had served as a director of the Ottoman Railway. "We were broken down," wrote Meissonier, "completely demoralized by the terrible news of the surrender of the whole army at Sedan." The news was terrible indeed. 83,000 French soldiers were in Prussian hands at Sedan, while another 17,000 lay dead or wounded on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the army of the Rhine was pinned down at Metz, and the city of Strasbourg was under siege. Meissonier was therefore surprised on leaving the house with Suzanne to find crowds marching through the streets around the Gare Saint-Lazare, showing their enthusiasm and wild delight. The contrast with our own state of mind, he wrote of this blithe company, astounded us at first, but Meissonier's republican instincts were rapidly stirred as he heard the mobs chanting, "Vive la République!" For on that day,
okay, so I'm starting to work through some ideas that I have something, but where's the camera? There it is. I've been at it for almost 40 minutes or something, 45 minutes, and the battery's running low, so I'm going to cut it short. Hopefully it'll rain. It's so dark in here I can barely see, really, with all the lights on. But it's so dark in here I can barely see. Hopefully it'll rain and the light will level out. And I'm going to try and do this again in a little bit. But for now I gotta quit. And let the battery charge. So glad we could do this on YouTube, and that's it. Gonna do some more stuff, and see you in a bit. Bye. Ciao. Oh, can't read.